everybody. This is T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. I thought we were going to finish this discussion last week, but we ended up covering a whole lot of interesting ground. And as a result, I want to finish the subject that we've been working on today. And that subject is about untapped potential on the change grid. Or perhaps another way to look at it is how do you go about, or how do you go about deciding that it's time to pay attention to some of the stuff that might be happening more down grid than upgrid. And so we've applied this to individuals, and we talked a lot about how you, as coaches and consultants, and other variations on human development, can work with clients who aren't paying attention to the kinds of things that might be plotting downgrade. And then we also talked about how this might play out at business levels, business operations, what happens when companies are ignoring the things that might be happening downgrid. Well, that left the big one, and that is what happens when cultures, societies, countries, municipalities, whatever, what happens when they aren't paying attention to things that are happening downgrid? Now, on the surface, this seems to be kind of a minor thing, but I think you're going to find out by the time that we're done that one of the greatest challenges of successfully operating any level of kind of major organization of people. So again, I'm talking about if you're a little community or a village or a little town, a city, a whole country, a whole society, you can play this out lots of different things. It's amazing how much stuff ends up downgrid and doesn't end up getting enough attention until something happens that moves the whole thing skyrocketing upgrade. And so I'm going to give you one example of this to get the ball rolling. As almost all of you have no doubt heard, at least everyone in the US has heard, the Colonial Pipeline Company, who runs an oil delivery. Just one second, I need to make sure we're muting. So you guys make sure you keep your lines muted unless you're going to share something. Um, Anyway, the Colonial Pipeline Company runs an oil delivery pipeline from Texas all the way up to right outside of New York City, if I believe, if I'm correct. So it goes all the way across the southern states, and then around Georgia, it starts heading north and goes through South Carolina, North Carolina, continues up through the Virginias and through Pennsylvania, and ultimately into New York City. So it's covering a whole lot. And I forget what percentage of the gasoline that our country requires, or that part of the country requires, is actually delivered by the Colonial Pipeline. But I don't think I'm out of whack if I say it's a good third or more, 40%, maybe even more to some places. Well, several years ago, there was a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. And that started showing some weaknesses in the Colonial Pipeline. And for a good long while, over a week, we were living in Charlotte at the time. Charlotte had no real gasoline coming to it through the pipeline. And we became increasingly reliant on oil being delivered by ship to the coastlines and then being delivered throughout the state. And at the time, it felt very ludicrous, but it was very legit. If you saw an oil tanker delivery truck, you would get behind it because you really didn't care where it went, but wherever it went, you would just go and wait until it delivered its oil so that you could its gasoline so that you could get whatever fuel you needed. And so it was really crazy. Well, in recent days, a cyber ransom security, what do they call that? Ransomware attack occurred. They believe it's something coming out of the Soviet Union, but nevertheless, the entire computer system that controls movement along the pipeline was compromised. And so right now, we have all of these colleagues and friends all along the eastern seaboard whose gas tanks are empty and aren't likely to be filled in the next several days. They're thinking right now that if all goes well, they might be able to restore partial service by the end of the week. And of course, they could just pay the ransom and probably get it all fixed. But there's something that's just, well, it's criminal, number one, but there's definitely an issue about paying for the ransom. Now, I bring this up only to say this is an example of something that may very well have been avoided if whoever was in charge of all that, whether that's at the company level, government level, whatever, had done some things, had paid closer attention to some things that had obviously slipped a bit further down grid than was really desirable. So, anyway, have any comments you want to throw out there about that as a starting point for describing what happens when we're not paying as close attention to things that you know needed some attention? Thoughts? Several
I
of you
think
have.
it's a great example.
Yeah. Now, Kathy, you're up in that area. Actually, you're probably further north than where this is really happening. But are you, even David in Michigan was saying the gas prices have gone up quite significantly.
They're up a little bit. We haven't really felt it yet
Yeah.
in a big way, but they're, and we use natural gas. So I'm not quite sure how we're all affected by it at this point, but in terms of gasoline,
Yeah.
yeah, our prices are up a little bit, but I mean, it's a perfect example of, I mean, not that I would call, you know, that kind of assessment or preparedness down grid, but evidently it is down grid,
Yeah.
given what's happened. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like this idea that understanding that if you have any kind of an operation that is dependent on a computer that is network enabled to manage what's going on, you'd best pay a lot of attention in advance to any security issues that might come. You have to anticipate what kinds of attacks might be heading your way down the road so that you can prepare yourself accordingly now. Well, if they got preoccupied with a lot of other upgrid things or were focused on more outgrid things, they may very well have minimized the threats of, or the minimized the belief that the threats were something they needed to pay attention to in that moment. And so that's why I'm describing that as a situation that was probably further down grid than was necessary to get the kind of attention paid to it to head this off at the pass.
Yeah, no, I
ET.
Yeah,
understand.
sure. Yep. But go ahead,
I-
Chris. Yep.
Yeah, I wonder, based on something you shared previously, what else has been consuming their attention? Because I mean, this cyber attack stuff has been going on for some time. So what could it have possibly been that was consuming all of their attention instead of focusing on something like protecting the
Sure.
grid?
That's a great question. Let's throw it to everybody on the call. So, what might be going on in a company like Colonial Pipeline that might have them so upgrid they're distracted, or might have them so far outgrid that they're focused, not so much distracted, but they're focused on whatever their outgrid objectives happen to be. What could be going on?
Daily production.
Daily production, right? Supply meeting demand, delivery of all that sort of thing. So, what else could be going on? I mean, they're a company, just plain money. How do we make more? What do we do? Because think about this during
We spend
COVID.
less.
Well, right. Think of this during COVID. Did you guys drive more or less than usual?
Less.
Less. And so, how do we think that translates into cash flow and profitability for gasoline oriented companies? Obviously, the volume wasn't there. That has to have taken its toll somehow. Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, marketing and how to get supply and yeah, and how to make money at the pump, how to manage pricing, those kinds of things so that they could
Yeah.
actually make some money. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things we found out because of where we are in the country, there has been a lot of, what do I want to say, resurgence of vintage advertising about seeing the USA by car. So encouraging everyone this year, take that vacation, get in that car, travel all over the West, go to the national park. So it's kind of like they're just encouraging us to use gasoline. That's what's really happening. So
I think
Maybe
also
maybe a part the obvious one, the money. Maybe their perceived ability was over perceived. I'm sorry to put it that way.
yeah, no, it's true. It's
That
true.
they were good and well in control while they
Right,
were.
better protected than they certainly were. So yeah,
I
Chris.
think recent events too, when that when that ship was blocked and the travel and for
Mhm.
other ships to bring supply internationally to the U.S. was halted for that time period could have created a large concern about where they're going to get their reserves from.
Well, exactly. And when the canal got blocked, I think that was the Suez Canal, if I'm correct. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Suez Canal got blocked. I forget the grand total number of ships that were delayed and how many of those ships had cargo that could spoil or whatever that were needed as raw materials. And because those raw materials didn't get to where they needed to go, then production of whatever those raw materials were used for was compromised if it didn't come to a screeching halt. It's interesting to see how all these things are interconnected. Which gets to another thing. Was there something going on with that ship that ended up turning sideways, or something going on with the Suez Canal itself where people were a bit too far down grid? And had they paid closer attention to whatever, maybe they could have turned it around. I think if I remember the reports that the ship was a matter of operator error. But yeah, anyway. Okay. Other thoughts, questions? Because I have a whole list here of things to throw out at you.
So T, would that
Can
be
I?
would that be
Yeah.
a situation with prioritization or a lack of real risk assessment?
I think, well, let's throw it to everybody. What do you guys think? How do you go about explaining why this downgrade stuff didn't get the attention that, in retrospect, it really needed?
It's probably a very big job. There's probably no expert inside the company to lead that charge. And so they're looking at maybe external vendors and deciding if they want to spend that much money to secure their system.
Weighing out how big is the threat versus
Yeah.
what's it going to cost to guess
Yeah.
what form the
Shareholder
next
return.
attack is going to take. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I think to answer your question, I think there could have been upgrade things that were interfering with it. And that's very different than the outgrid things. So the outgrid things might have been a little bit more about the whole investment side of things. They'd rather invest in whatever they know for certain is going to make them money than invest heavily in what could protect them in the long run, that in and of itself is not so much income generating as much as it would be income. Well, I'm going to say protecting, but it would fall in the category of income conserving. So, and I'm using those words, so let me just remind everybody that if you were to go back to an article I wrote long ago, and I'm sure we've talked about in Management Matters and Pride-Based Leadership, all work falls into one of three categories: income generating, income conserving, and income consuming. So I don't care who the employee is, I don't care what the task happens to be. It is either directly or indirectly income generating, or it might be very focused about protecting, maintaining, conserving the income that has been generated. So we don't want to overspend or do stupid things with our money. So conserve it, or it's just outright consuming, because you got to spend money to make money, and not everything you spend money on is going to help you conserve dollars or generate dollars. So I'm saying all that again just to say that they might have been so concerned with the need to generate income that they said there's no way we can do income consuming things, even income conserving things, because we don't have enough income being generated right now to make that balance sheet all work out the way we'd want it to. Did that help at all, dear Chris?
Oh, yes, it did. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. Now, I've got a few other things I want to throw out. And again, what we're looking at in all these situations are the downgrid side of life in a I want to say in a societal setting, cultural setting, whatever level you want to look at it at. How many things end up being downgrid, end up being neglected, and then sooner or later something happens, and the powers that be now have to suddenly react to it. Again, an upgrade problem occurred; they have to react to it. And how we go around it. Now, before I go into this, I must implore all of you, we are going to be tipping our toes into things that could be politically charged. That is not our goal. Our goal is to simply look at, from a tension management perspective, what is downgrid? How did it end up downgrid? What might it cost us if these things stay downgrid? And how do you go about, remedying all that? And, it's also fun to look at, well, what was going on upgrid and outgrid that prevented people from giving the attention to these things that are downgrid? So I'm going to start with I'll ease into it as gently as I can. um, think about historically kind of wars, countries being invaded. So they didn't really have the kinds of military they needed. They didn't have the kinds of border protections they needed, etc. And because those things weren't having enough attention paid to them, they were prime for invasions and being overtaken, etc. So how many different examples in history do you think there are of a country, a village, or whatever, getting caught with its security pants down? Yeah, some, none, a lot. What do you guys think?
Huge.
Huge, huge. It's a lot there. Now, why would they have ignored their borders protection? Why would they have underestimated the other threats, the other countries or the other kingdoms or whatever would have been in play at the time? Why did they ignore it? Why did it not get their attention? What do you think might be happening, upgrid and outgrid, that just stopped them? Hmm. Thoughts about that, Kathleen? Yeah, Kathy?
Yeah. I mean, it just might be simply that they misread their relationships with their neighbors, or misread the intentions of their neighbors. And so there's that piece. There's awareness and the ability to and the relationship component. The other piece is always, money and resources, like what we've been talking about. They might not have just had the money and resources, and they were focused on other things to support it. But it could very well be that they just weren't aware of what their neighbors might have been intending, who did, invade and underestimated. I mean, look what happened certainly in too,
Yep.
Another time. So
Yeah, exactly.
And could it be the apathy, the natural, effect of mastery is apathy, that they
Sure.
did well and got lazy? Yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten along so well for so many generations.
Right.
We trust them completely, and then you have these things that changed and you didn't really notice them because, again, to Edie's point, you kind of just started taking that relationship for granted and ended up down in power, apathy, and apathy around it. Yeah. And then you also have the situations we like watching historical dramas that may or may not be accurate historically, but nevertheless, as Linda would tell you, the dresses are really nice. But uh, how about the sheep and wolves? No, the wolf in sheep's clothing. So, whoever it is that is ultimately going to attack and invade you are presenting themselves to you as being totally trustworthy and your ally and all those good sorts of things, but it didn't come along. And so I bring this up just as one of the ways of illustrating that not everything that ends up downgrade because we are so far upgrade about other problems or so far outgrid because we've got other objectives. Sometimes we end up downgrade simply because we really are comfortable and we've never had to worry about it. So why should we worry about it? So it's not like there's something upgrade or outgrid that's distracting us from paying attention to these things. These things have never really required any real attention. I'll give you an example of this that I think is certainly true to this day. How many of you, most of us on the call are Americans, a couple of our European colleagues are on the call as well. So I'm sure that they can relate to what we're about to say and find their own example of this. But how many of us as Americans are worried about Canada invading us? Anybody got any issues with Canada? Anyone losing any sleep at all over
None whatsoever.
none? What?
The
None?
border.
It's one of the longest. Well, we do have some ports of entry, but it's an unsecured border. It's wide open. I mean, for the vast majority of the frontier, you could just walk right across the border and probably not even know you walked across the border. So,
Yeah,
uh,
counter that. I think that the border has gotten a lot more secure because they're more worried about us.
well, certainly, but they're not worried about us invading them. If anything, they're worried about having, well, back in when people were trying to avoid the draft, there was a lot of movement of people from the US into Canada. And now, of course, there's COVID as a situation that's that. But I don't know how many different official points of entry there are between the US and the Canadian border, but they would cover a fraction of the actual physical space that's involved in the whole thing. So this is my whole thing. As an American, I'm down in apathy, power apathy and apathy about Canada. So when it comes to them threatening us or that, we're just, we're good neighbors. We've always been good neighbors. So et cetera. You guys agree with me on this? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody live up close to the border? You go like, yeah, well, we got some local issues. But
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. So again, we don't have to be preoccupied with something upgrid or outgrid in order to have things end up downgrid. Sometimes they end up downgrid just because they don't merit any attention by themselves at all. Okay, so with that as a gentle one, let me go into this one. So there's a lot right now going on in the US about a massive budget for infrastructure being done, and certainly an expansion of what infrastructure would include and all that good sort of a thing. But what often gets talked about are the condition of roads in the country and bridges that are in the country. Now, forget the politics that are going on around it right now. Just think about these bridges have been there for a good long while. Did they suddenly all just get into bad shape now? I mean, does this just happen in the past year or so? No. For a very long period of time, all of these structural sort of things all around the country, and it's also tunnels. It's all sorts of things are happening in terms of infrastructure. These things have been decaying for a good long while. Like David is in Michigan. Most everyone in the U.S. and certainly other people around the world may very well have heard about this town in Michigan by the name of Flint. And Flint ended up having a huge problem with its water delivery system. So all of the pipes that were delivering fresh water to all the homes and everything all throughout Flint, somehow something happened. I don't know, David, maybe you can remind me of what actually was the
They
original.
changed the water source.
Yeah, well, they found lead in the water,
Well, no, they were using a water source in Detroit that was chemically treated to prevent the water from leaching lead out of the pipes.
oh, okay.
And they changed the water source and didn't add that into it. So the lead was leaching out of the pipes because of the different water source. And that's what they picked up on. And there was
Yeah.
leaking airs where something like 15 people died.
Oh yeah. And for those of you who aren't, up on Flint, this has been going on for what, at least a couple of years, a few years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so people had to have 100% bottled water in their home. There were water shortages galore and on and
My,
on. Well,
my son and his girlfriend used to go stand and hand out bottled water every weekend for months.
yeah. Yeah. Now, that water system in Flint was ancient by any standards long before this problem actually occurred. In fact, they probably started to look into Detroit water supply as a way of getting around whatever was happening with their own water system. I don't remember all of it,
Yeah,
but
well, they
yeah.
wanted to get water out of one of the Great Lakes, and they couldn't pass a bill to create that new source. So
Mm.
to save money, they changed water sources and didn't treat the water the way that Detroit was treating its water.
Right. And so again, looking at this situation from a tension management perspective, if we go way back in time, there was a point in time when Flint and perhaps the state of Michigan invested very heavily in creating this, it's not the sewer system. What do you call the system that delivers water? Um, but whatever that system is called. So the water treatment facility, whatever it is that was there, they invested very heavily, and no doubt it served Flint very well for a very long time. And as a result, it became kind of a normal thing that got taken care. It always took care of itself, didn't require much attention, if any at all. And over the course of time, perhaps decades, it ended up moving further and further down grid in people's awareness. Fair to say, yep, that's what's happening when it comes to any kind of infrastructure. You invest very heavily, it's really beautiful, it gets started in for a significant period of time. It's doing what it's supposed to be done, and so it's not demanding any of your attention, so it doesn't get any attention, and sooner or later it ends up very far down grid.
Well, these are older towns in industrial sectors
Yep,
that were built in the 40s and with lead pipes.
yep,
And anything that was built back then, the city I grew up in, Pontiac, Saginaw, Flint,
yeah.
Jackson, all those cities are replete with neighborhoods with lead pipes.
Yep. And now, so think about this. At some point in time, there was awareness that while there was no immediate problem, that there was a problem waiting for some point in the
Yep.
future. So why, and this is a question for all of you, so unmute, chime in, whatever. Why do you think whoever was in charge of whatever didn't put their energy into doing something proactive, didn't do something to, deal with whatever the issue was or was waiting for them down the road? What was going on?
Their
Well,
attention was higher about other things that needed to be done. So they said, well, we'll just do that next year. We'll do that next year.
Mhm. Got
well,
postponed.
the,
So,
the
yep.
city was failing economically. People were moving out. They had a lot of rent subsidies and everything else. So, those neighborhoods just continued to go downhill year after year after year.
Yep. In fact, Linda and I lived in Michigan for most of our lives. I remember when there was T-shirts available that said, "Flint, with the last one to leave, please turn the lights out."
Yep.
So because the auto manufacturers moved out of Flint, um, and I forget what was that strange
Auto
tourist
World,
attraction, Auto World, was that what it
Auto
was called?
World.
Auto World. Oh, what a
Yeah.
yeah, that was strange. But yeah, it was supposed to be a theme attraction that was going to bring in tourism and create jobs and all sorts of things. And I'm
The
sure,
downtown streets of Flint are brick. It's really kind of fascinating with
mm,
with nice architecture and everything else. But it's like anything. You go to any major metropolitan area, you go 2 blocks in any direction, and you'll see something different.
yep. Very interesting. So, my point is that that's just one example of an infrastructure issue. Well, if we go all across the country, there are thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of individual infrastructure issues. And yeah, right now they're getting a whole lot of attention, and that's all fine. But again, that's not really the subject. The question really is, why is it important for municipalities to periodically do an inventory of all the things that are down grid, or examine the things that are down grid, do an inventory of their infrastructure, and do whatever they can do to become a little bit more proactive? Now, I know that's all good to say, because ultimately what they're going to do is come back to the citizens and say, we need to increase some taxes, we need to raise some money, we need a millage, we need a whatever it's going to take in order to fix this before it becomes a really big problem. And so if that has to go to a vote of the public, what do you think the public often says about investing today for a problem that isn't happening today?
No, thanks.
Yeah, no thanks. It's just the way that it is. So now again, we're looking at some other dynamic. And again, this is different than the people who trusted a border because nothing was actually going on. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Joseph. You just said that. Joseph just said this is such a lovely conversation, a little different than the calls with the presentation. Yeah. Yep. So all right. So again, this isn't about, well, why should I be worried about something? This is about active neglect. People either not seeing that there was a problem, which is not believable, or deciding that at this point in time they were either unable or unwilling to to focus on this right now. And that's a little different situation because what do you think happens if your bridge is starting to crack? You think you're ever going to need to deal with it? The answer is sooner or later, yes. And then infrastructure becomes a much bigger concern, an even bigger price tag, et cetera. Now, we could continue to talk about that, but let's bring the matter home for a second. How many of you have got things in your own household, on your own property, that are, fall in the category of infrastructure, local infrastructure? It might just be your house, but for whatever reasons, you're not really paying attention to it at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, I can give you a great example. I have 3 decks on my house, 2 small wood decks in the back and 1 large wraparound porch in the front. And I had them painted last year and spent $2,800 to have that done. And this year, after the snow melted, well, let me just say half the paint peeled up. So I sit here every day in my office and look at them. And they're supposed to come out next week.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
haven't been out. The painter actually got COVID,
Oh,
and they haven't been out. And I'll tell you, for years I just didn't even think about the decks. Now I think about them every day.
yeah. Yep. Now, this brings up something that Chris sent over to me over the weekend, and it was a question about, well, what is the relationship between value and importance? And I think that's what it's getting at when we're talking about things around our own households that might need to have some attention paid to it. So, and in fact, Joseph just sent over here, it seems to come down to the balance between importance and tension. So some part of the organization or of our time needs to be devoted to create checklists and priorities. Okay, all right. So so David, is getting the paint repaired important to you? Or how important?
I feel like I got ripped off. I mean,
Yeah.
my boys have painted these decks numerous times. And so I finally said, you know what, I'm going to pay a professional to come out here because I want it one and done.
Yep.
And he came out with 2 guys, and they were out here for about a week. And I thought, and at the end, it all looked magnificent. It looked beautiful. And then we went through the winter and it snowed, and I'm not thinking anything. And all of a sudden the snow melts and I see these decks, and I called him right away. And so, like I said, for years, I just ignored these decks. Last year, I decided to do something about it. It wasn't done well. Now I'm upgrade.
Yep. And so we think about this. Now it's important, but it's important for multiple reasons. Because one, there's the principal issue of you paid for something and you really didn't get the quality that you paid for.
Right.
And then the second thing is that it's got to look in a way that you don't really want it to be looking. So
Oh,
that's why you paid it to begin with. And so,
I want to sell this house in the next year or 2. I don't need these problems.
right, exactly right. So now, Chris, I don't know if you're in a place where you can unmute or not, but do you want to share what we were chatting about with value and importance? So go ahead and share that with everybody.
Yeah, because I was reading. Let me get it out in front of me. Try to pull up the conversation.
I am too. I'm
Reading
getting it.
Paul, yeah, I was trying to see where.
Yeah, just a second. Right
Okay,
here
there
it
it
is.
goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was reading Paul's book, and it sparked the question. He said, so, and the question I had was, should value be a dimension? Because I think there's a distinction between, because something can be important, but your value, do you really value it? The value of it could be low. Say, just for example, like health. Our health should always be important, but how much is it valued? Right? If it was valued, I think we'd be doing some, more people would do something about it. So I'm thinking like, okay, you can know that something is important, or something can have a high importance to you, but if you don't value it, will you ever do something about it? And it was a connection with, I was thinking with the threshold of activation, because how could something like health could sit in the threshold of activation and you're not doing anything about it? And the reason why you're not doing anything about it, because you may not value it as high as it should be.
Okay, there's a lot there for us to dive
I
into.
know. I do apologize. I was getting
No,
it
no,
all
no.
out.
Yeah, anybody want to chime in? Yeah, no. All right, let me.
Well, I think he's got a point there. I mean, I know there are several things in my life that are important, but there are other things I value more, so I invest in those.
Right, because those things that you invest in
Have high value.
have high value, but does that make them more or less important?
No, not necessarily.
See, part of our discussion I was having with Chris, and this was all through in chat, um, was that I have always considered the value assessment as being a component of overall importance. Now that we brought up this discussion, I'm wondering if importance is actually one of the contributing factors to value.
Hmm.
Hmm.
But
So,
isn't it, T, isn't it all a matter, like when you don't have your health, you value it. It's consciousness, it's awareness, it's where the tension is. So there's pain and there's tension when you don't have your health. And that becomes number one for people
mhm,
when they lose it. Once they have cancer from smoking, they might quit.
mhm, 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 mhm.
Isn't that
Right.
where
Well,
it's?
I think that's a great example of it. And one of the other things I chatted over to Chris was I said this
Hmm.
idea about where did the declaration that something is important actually come from? Did it come from you personally? Or did it come from what is supposed to be a grander knowing or understanding or universal sort of
No,
thing about
no.
that? It's got to be you. It's
We
you.
give so value is given by the person that buys something or needs something or whatever. You do it
That's right.
yourself.
That's right.
Nobody
And
else can give it.
right, evaluate means we are bestowing value onto something. So that's what we're hopefully doing by the end of it. And so that's what my concern was, that I believe if you value it, you consider it important. But if you don't value it, then you probably don't consider it important, even though others may tell you, well, you're a fool. It's very important. Sorry, it's not important to you. And so we always have to remember that the change grid and human behavior in general is based entirely on perceptions. And our perceptions are nothing more than that. They're just perceptions. Maybe they align with reality. Maybe we need to have a discussion about who has the right to even say something is real. So I just think the whole thing is perception. And so Chris, I know I'm babbling a little bit, but I get back to this idea that just says, if you genuinely believe it's important and you genuinely value it, okay, then it's probably going to get your attention. If you truly value it, but you don't consider it important, I'm very confused. Give me an example of something you very much value, but you don't consider important. Or vice versa, something that you think is super important, but you do not personally value.
Yeah, and I spent some time thinking about this. So, and I'm thinking in terms of the threshold of activation and activating, right? So, if something can be important and
Yep.
have low value and
Yep.
no action is taking place,
Yeah.
but something can be of high importance and of high value and action take place.
Yeah.
So the reason why I come to you, my oracle, is because now something can have high value and low importance, but would that mean activation takes place?
No,
And I would
because
say no.
yeah, because the threshold is
Right.
a totally different thing. And keep in mind that by definition, if someone takes action, they were at their threshold. And if they don't take action, they were not at their threshold. And so if you were describing something, for example, say, well, the person values it greatly and it's really important to them, but they didn't follow through and do it. Well, they weren't at their threshold. They didn't have enough tension. So I can value a lot of things that are very important to me, but still not have sufficient tension to hit my threshold and follow through and do something.
You know what, T? I also think this brings in, if you're more right brain or left brain or kinesthetic or whatever. My son was getting overweight, maybe when he was about 12 years old. I spoke at a wellness conference where I could bring the family, and he cognitively learned, and he lost 25 pounds, and he's probably on the lean side all the rest of his life. But he's, I left brain people can have the concept and be motivated and go to the point of activation. You can have an alcoholic and they say you got to hit bottom, and there are kinesthetic people that until they hit bottom they lose everything and feel so much pain, then they take action. So it's a matter of who's an abstract learner and who's limbic, and that gets into a whole nother ballgame. But I think that's a true factor.
Yeah.
That you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, when my ex-husband quit smoking, the doctor, I wouldn't marry him unless he quit. Well, of course, then he, all of the closet smoking. But the bottom line was, when the doctor finally said, you quit or you die, he quit.
Yep.
And why didn't the doctor say it 40 years earlier? And so I think that has a lot to do with when we're activated to change.
Well, because let's think about what Edie has just shared, everyone. What she's really just illustrated is the power of upgrid maneuvers. So upgrade maneuvers are all about raising your level of tension up to the threshold. And keep in mind, you could be down in apathy about a whole bunch of things, which tells me you got plenty of ability. You've got all the knowledge, you got all the skill, you got everything you need. You know exactly what's going on. And for whatever reason, right now, you're framing it as not being a very challenging thing at all. So here you are, you're downgrid about whatever the case may be. Well, the upgrade maneuvers, increase the standards against which you're measuring your own performance or your own health or your own, change the word to whatever you need it to be to fit. So maybe some of the standards that we're changing. Certainly, if someone tells me live or die, your choice, I do believe you've just impacted the standards that are there. The second one is you change the task altogether. And you tried that. You said stop smoking and we get married, or keep smoking and we don't. So you were trying to create some new aspect to the game, some new part of the deal or the transaction itself. So that was changing the task in some sort of a way. The third one was about awakening emotions. And you were talking about people hitting rock bottom and that sort of thing. So they want to feel a different way. Instead of feeling the shame or the guilt or the whatever, they'd rather feel a more positive upgrade emotion like pride and confidence and all that sort of thing. Maybe you need to move them further upgrade so they feel some fear or whatever that will ultimately get them to hit a threshold and do something. And then the last one is about boosting accountability. We have to, sometimes keep an eye on ourselves or other people and keep them on task and all those good sorts of things as we're moving on. So I think what you guys have just described is really that the person is simply not at their threshold of activation. And so there's a whole set of things, right brain, left brain, auditory, kinesthetic, whatever aspect we want to look at about how the brain gathers, processes, interprets, utilizes information that it's gathering. Ultimately, these things are all impacting our level of tension, sometimes going up, sometimes going down, but ultimately it's falling into the many ways that tension is managed inside of the human animal. That was a very long comment to a very, but good, bad, agree, disagree. What do you guys think?
Agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agree.
Okay. All
So
right. And,
T,
yeah.
so therefore, your explanation in the conversation really shows that not a value should not be a dimension. And I started thinking about what about a layer, and I couldn't see how we could
Well, we can play
have
with that
value
right.
as a layer.
No, we can play with that one real fast. And so I want all of you guys to prepare to chime in, either verbalize or just type this little quote here. But I want to know, when you think about things that you truly value, where on the change grid would those things reside? And make it really easy to start off with. Are the things you value most upgrade, outgrid, downgrid, ingrid, midgrid? Where in the most general terms are you likely to find things that you value? Or if it's easier, where do you think things that you don't attach any value to, where do they end up plumping you on the change grid?
The last one, downgrid.
Yeah,
Down,
downward.
yeah. So the things I don't value are more likely to be downgrid. Okay.
I-
Yeah. Does that
Well,
feel
so
right?
it's the center of the change grid.
Center of the change grid was where we'd value things.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with
And
that.
so outgrid, what's happening outgrid? This is all the stuff we're all driven around. Might we say, oh no, we value those things. That's why we're driven to go after them.
I was going to
So
say outgrid is probably where you would place value, where you would value somewhere between the PowerPoint and outgrid.
yeah, how about if I said that's where we were likely to pursue value, the acquisition of that value or the expansion of that value. So maybe outgrid is where we go and create value. That could be part of it too.
Sorry, T. Maybe I misunderstood. Did you say where we don't find value? Where would
Well,
we?
either way, you could either talk about here's where we don't value, and then what's left would be where we do value it, or you could focus on where you do value something and what's left is where we don't value things. So either way, it still ends up helping us to try to figure out, where does value live on the change grid? Other thoughts about it? Might we value things that are upgrid? So you're in a situation, whatever it is, it
Actually,
is.
it can be anywhere.
It could be anywhere. Okay.
I mean, you're talking about perceived challenge and ability on the grid. I mean, couldn't it be anywhere? I mean, it depends on the level of it, but it could be anywhere.
Could be anywhere. I'll give you guys an example of something that's down grid that we all value greatly, and that's getting a good night's sleep. So, we're not
Yeah.
up in stress about it. We're not out grid about it, but
Yeah.
we just know physiologically we're going to end up tired sooner or later. If we want a good night's sleep, we got to be down in apathy. We greatly, greatly value that good night's sleep. And so I'm bringing this all up to just say that we may find value just about anywhere on the change grid. But when we change it to the change cube, and now we add that third dimension of importance, are we likely to find value higher on the importance scale or lower on the importance scale?
Again, I think that could go either way.
All right, tell us about that.
Well, um, you know, physical health is important. And we all know that there are certain things that we should do to maintain our physical health or our physical structure, our home, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
But oftentimes we choose to do different things with that time, even though we know it's important.
Mhm. How about if I said there's a difference between the importance rating that comes out of our head and the importance rating that comes out of our truth? Hmm. So do you guys see a distinction between importance as an intellectual process versus importance as a visceral process?
Well, yeah,
Yes.
because I think the visceral process is going to carry more tension.
Absolutely right. Look, intellectually, we know all sorts of things are valuable and important, but the intellectual assessment of it is not where we live. We live that visceral um, assessment or approach or angle or whatever. And so I don't care how intellectually important I think something is. If I don't feel it, I don't feel it, and that's going to run the day. And I can say, intellectually something is very valuable, but if I don't feel it, then there's that. So I look at the word perception, I go, I wonder if perception is more about what we're feeling viscerally than perception as being the result of an intellectual process. Thoughts about that?
Well, intellectuals downgrid to begin with.
Certainly, if you want to live there, it's going to sooner or later move you down grid.
All you got to do is do some research, do some thinking, do some dialogue,
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
down, down.
Yep, yep, yep. And so that's why I guess what I'm saying to you guys is that whenever we're kind of looking at these puzzles and going like, well, wait, value could be at any level of importance. Well, can value exist at any level of intellectual importance? Yes. Does value exist everywhere along the visceral importance assessment?
I would think so.
Yeah.
See, that's what I'm not sure. I think that viscerally, as much as I want to say to the whole world, I'm intelligent, I can tell you it's important in my heart of hearts, in my gut, in my whatever, I'm kind of going like, no, it's not. It's not as important as I'm representing it to everybody else.
Hmm.
Now, yeah, go ahead, Edie.
Well, you know what? I'm just thinking the same son that abstractly kind of got the information, lost the weight, never very health conscious. I remember once he was trying to think of a thought. We're talking intellectual, nothing. And he spent 3 hours in the basement looking for what's his name, Nietzsche. How do you pronounce it?
Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche.
Yes, it was in his book. And so I'm just looking at the high level of tension he went through to find a word.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I just, so what you're saying is, I don't know if it's always down grid, that it was very stressful for him to find that sentence or that quote or that word.
Right.
Does that?
I'm saying that
Hmm.
his pursuit of that word was driven by something visceral.
Interesting. Say more about that.
It might have been triggered by an intellectual thought, but something got into his core. Something got into, and if Brian was on the call, he could tell us all the neurotransmitters that are involved, but something really got us obsessed with
Mm-hmm.
finding that information. And it was way beyond whatever the intellectual part of the whole trigger mechanism was. So something of that, I'm talking about visceral, something in that core kind of essential truth of who we really are, not who we represent ourselves to be, is what was making him look for that.
Interesting.
I totally
Interesting.
agree with that. That makes perfect sense to me, because I know that and I do have my obsessions, intellectual obsessions
Mm-hmm.
but they're triggered by something intellectual. But what is driving me is some memory, some emotional connection that I might have with a person, or an experience from my past or my present that says, I have to find out about that because it means something to me. It matters to my identity, or
Right.
it matters to my heart, whatever it is. And that's when I can spend hours trying to find something and research something that way.
Yeah. Yep. And you see, if I said, well, let's make two lists of things today to get done. If I said, okay, here's a whole list of today's priorities based on your intellectual processing, and here's a list of today's priorities, so the important things for today, based purely on what your gut is telling you, your visceral sorts of stuff. Which list do you think is more likely to compel you? The visceral list or the intellectual list?
Visceral list.
The visceral list. So now I go back to the idea about, well, how does value come into play? I think there's a big difference between, it's almost like the intellectual importance may include things that I believe I should value, but viscerally, I just plain don't. I think that's a very real possibility for people. So now why am I sharing all that? I'd like to, get this back to what, society and what we're looking at on this little change grid sort of a thing. But let me throw one out, and this would probably end up being the most political. Thankfully, we only have 5 minutes left, so I can't get too far off track. But right now, there are many, 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 many people in the country who make more money being on unemployment than if they took their job. Meanwhile, there's countless employers that are desperately looking for employees, but can't get them because people are making more money not working than working. All right, so set aside whatever political beliefs you have about all that. It's all about tension management. And so I thought this was interesting where when Chris brought this up, because I thought, well, is it important that people work? Do they value working? It's important that they have resources. They value having those resources. So I'm just trying to figure out why it is that we have so many people that are so far down grid about getting back to work. By the way, all that being said, there are a few people that are very far up grid about returning to work for various reasons, but nevertheless, but the bulk of them that we're looking at, should we even continue to offer any kind of a stimulus money or any kind of a boost to the unemployment sort of a thing, the question becomes, when do those subsidies become a deterrent to people returning to the workforce who have no reason otherwise not to return to the workforce? So, and I know I'm babbling a little bit, but what ultimately ended up happening was that,
I've got two kids who fall into that category. They're paying them $1,200 a month on top of unemployment.
yep,
Oh my
Top
God.
of unemployment.
yep,
They can't make that much at $12 an hour, $11 an hour.
right, 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 right. And so this ends up becoming the question. In fact, I think what I read was that unless a job pays you more than $40,000 a year, you actually make more money staying on unemployment right now because of the subsidies. Well, how many jobs, and again, they're working on adjusting the minimum wage and all that, but nevertheless, how many jobs are out there that we desperately need to have done don't pay 40 grand a year?
Right.
A
I
lot of them.
mean,
The
a
other,
lot
the
of
other
them.
thing about that is how many of those jobs are jobs that people really want to do.
Well, exactly, exactly. But I'm even thinking about people of the age where they're having their very first job.
Right. Yeah.
So we all, I don't know what your guys' first job was, but I worked at Burger King for a while when I was in high school and in
Okay.
college. I mean, come on, we all had low paying jobs and we were
Yeah.
getting our first, right?
Yeah.
So,
You know
so
what?
yeah.
Wait, am I on? Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, yep.
Did you know McMaster's, the governor of South Carolina,
Hmm,
is overruling, and he is not allowing anybody in South Carolina to receive stimulus money because
yeah,
with Myrtle Beach and everything, they're really hurting.
yeah.
But how can our politicians be so stupid? This is a very disturbing thing to me. We have fast food places that are not open now because they can't get help,
Yep.
and they're offering $1,000 bonus at a fast food place.
Right, right. To
So,
come to
so
work. Yep. Hmm.
what can we, why is this happening though? Do you know?
Well, again, leaving the political side of it, that has to do with the levels of tension that individuals are employing one way or another as a workforce. Um, we've ended up very far down grid when it comes to getting back to work. And a lot of things that have been done initially because of COVID and all that, they were done because they were truly necessary. People needed
Mhm,
to
mhm.
have some help or whatever going on. But these things, the question becomes, how long should these things continue before they actually become a detriment to our the way we operate, then is something that's actually of great service to it. And the thing is that when you have a whole group of people who are now downgrade about working,
Mhm.
don't be at all surprised to find out that they don't have enough. Remember, definitive change occurs on the change grid, either outgrid or upgrid. Outgrid is because they genuinely want to get back to work. They want to go out there and make things happen. Apparently, that's not been sufficient.
Yeah,
And
I did the
so,
math. I did the math, and someone on unemployment right now makes $15.63 an hour.
isn't that amazing? Isn't that
Well, I
amazing?
mean, what does that
Wait,
tell you?
and that's without the stimulus, is that?
No,
Is
that's
that
with
only?
With the
that's with
stimulus.
the stimulus.
Well,
Okay.
what does that tell you? I mean, all we have to do is raise minimum wages in order for people
Yeah,
to.
but people aren't going to pay more money, and the business owners can't have labor costs that
Well,
high and
that's
can't
true.
have profit.
That's
Well,
true. And
I don't, I think that that's a false argument. I think that we could reprogram things so that we actually support businesses so that they can, instead of repurposing that money to individuals, repurpose it to businesses so that they can pay people and make it a requirement to pay
That
people
would be a better way.
a living
absolutely a
wage.
better way, a better
A
way.
li-
Now, again, we're talking about societal problems that ends up dipping our toe into political things.
Yeah,
And well, but I always want to just make sure we're focusing on looking at the tension management aspects of what's going on. I
well,
would
it,
say to you, Kathy, that um, if I am downgrid about going back to work, and you say to me, well, I'll either give you $15 and change per hour not to work, or $15 and change per hour to go back to work, what do you think my choice is going to be?
well, I think that there is an assumption that that's the case, but there have been studies shown that people really generally do like to work.
Now
And
you're talking about an outgrid movement. Right, exactly right.
right. So that people generally do like to, I mean, that argument's been around as long as the welfare arguments have been around. And so there are a lot of factors going on with people not wanting to go back to work, some of which
Mhm.
involve their families and their children.
Yep, yep, yep. And so some people are still concerned about the contagion and all
Right,
that kind of
right.
elements
So
going on. Yeah.
there's all of those factors right now.
Yep.
But most people do not, I mean, you're making the assumption that most people would rather sit on their butts than
Nope.
not work most of the
Yeah.
time.
No.
And I don't think that's the case. I think that studies have shown over and over again that people generally like to work. And if they're incented to, to be paid enough money to be able to survive on a wage, I mean, that's why I don't see the
Right.
wage thing.
Well, but I would take it up a little step, and yeah, I know we're at the top of the hour, but I just want to say this, and maybe we can explore it on a different call. I believe that the focus right now is all about money. Talking about money is not an outgrid maneuver. We
Right.
need outgrid maneuvers. We need people to give messages to the workforce that all those outgrid maneuvers need to happen. We need people to step into a leadership role and say, we need all of you to step in leadership role. We need you to get back to all the friendships and all that you had with your work. We need you to get back to making a difference in the world. All those messages talking about why people work. We all know that while there's a certain, what do they call when you have a need just because you need certain amount of money, as opposed to the things that are more important to you. So there are several reasons why people work or are motivated that have got nothing to do with money. And they actually are far more important than the money itself is. So yeah, you need some money. The word just came in, it went right through my head.
Well, it's the intrinsic value
Yeah, it's intrinsic versus extrinsic. Yeah, but this is also about, the word has to do something with about hygiene, cleanliness, something like that. I can't remember the word. Anyway, I'll remember in the middle of the night and then I'll reach out and call all of you. But I think that's part of the problem too. The movement can't just be upgrid, which eliminating the stimulus will definitely do. We need to move people upgrid and outgrid.
yeah.
So we don't need to get them to make them go to work. We need to make them want to go to work.
Exactly.
And that's part of the issue. You know, the root causes of human struggle and failure are they're either unaware, unable, unwilling, or unsuitable. We are dealing with an unwillingness issue. And we don't deal with an unwillingness issue by just building a hotter fire under somebody. We need to get them back into the purpose of work, the change that work makes, the mission, the vision, all that good sort of a thing. But I'm just up on my soapbox now, but you get the idea. We need to be doing far more on the leadership side of things to communicate those messages instead of just the word just threw right through my head again.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway, there you go. I'll remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think people do what they know. I mean, I'm originally from Wisconsin, which was a highly entitled program state, until we had the welfare reform. And people were coming over the border from Illinois, collecting there, checking in at a motel in Wisconsin and double dipping. And they were putting all their resources and energy in how to work the system. We had 5 generations of that. And we are creatures of habit. So if that's all we know, I worked with these people as a psychotherapist, and I can honestly say there was no desire to work. So I think, Kathy, that is changing. I really do, because the more people, there are enough people that get used to being handed out, and then they expect it and they're angry when they don't get it. So I think there's a change going on, because our system has changed, and in some ways has created a learned dependency, which I think is another form of slavery. So I
Yes.
think there's other changes going on.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more complicated than all of
Yeah,
those
it is.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And T, I agree with you. It really is about motivating people to want to work. And so it's, you put people back into you take that away and put people back into the same unfulfilling system, and you're going to have a lot the same issues that you had before. So
Exactly right. Okay, anyway, my point, just to bring this all to closure, we're well over our time right now, is I just wanted to say that there is a great deal of things that happen in all sorts of societal levels, if you will, that are down grid. And periodically, we need anyone who's involved in the management of any kind of an organization, because I'm sure this also plays out club. You got to do an inventory of the things that are down grid. And you've got to then figure out, when do we need to do about this? So the list I had here, where there's infrastructure issues, cyber attacks, invasions, economic issues can be downgrade, racial issues we're downgrid. Now they're moving elsewhere in the change grid. We talked about unemployment, border disputes, drug movement around the country, healthcare. These are all things that, for whatever reasons, could slip too far downgrid and will not demand enough attention until enough noise is made around them, or they make some sort of a problem that has to be dealt with. So okay, anyway, more we'll talk about. Yeah, it's so true. Joseph was saying media moves everything up grid. They do, because they're trying to sell advertising. So that's all. Yeah, anyone who thinks the media is a source of the truth, I don't care what side of the spectrum you're on. Sorry. No, it's all been packaged for our consumption. Okay. All right. So with that, on Thursday, we have a new topic, and that topic is about mindfulness on the change grid, motivation on the change grid, meditation, and probably a whole bunch of other M words. So do plan on joining us, and we'll start a new little process. Maybe at some point, our next thing will be motivation on the change grid. That'll help us pick up on this where we left off. Okay. So with that. Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye for
everyone.
now.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. See you later.
You just did it, Edie.
Oh,
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.
take care. Bye.